Give you an example. I was in Nabi Saleh. Nabi Saleh has a scheduled riot every Friday at approximately 1:15. I hired a photographer because I wanted all the pictures of the confrontation. His name was Boaz. I showed up. I had my Kevlar helmet on, my bulletproof vest. I worked closely with B'Tselem. They told me when to leave my hotel, when to arrive, when the riot would start. It's all arranged. Except my photographer didn't show up. So that's a problem. So now they marched through town completely unmolested with the full right to demonstrate. They tried to reach and close the highway. This is shut. They are stopped by the security forces. The security forces are acting like stones. They're trying not to be provoked. In the meantime, there are B'Tselem volunteers who are household holders in the very people who are planning the disruption. They're dancing around the soldiers, 5 inches from their nose. They're insulting their mother. They're draping flags over their helmet. They're pushing their kids into M16s. This is child endangerment. They're using children as human shields. This is a violation of international law. They are not there to observe human rights. They're there, it seems, to provoke a misstep by an Israeli soldier who's trying his best not to be harassed. You couldn't do this to a meter maid in Washington, D.C. You couldn't do this to a traffic cop in downtown Chicago. You could not dance around a soldier in Midtown, a policeman in Midtown Manhattan with impunity. So Boaz, my photographer, didn't show up. And there's a video of me at Nabi Saleh on the internet with the protesters saying it's not fair, no one is doing anything, this is not how it really is, it's a fake, it's too peaceful. The soldiers are not using brutality. Finally, and then they started to chant for the skunk. This is it's a water cannon truck that shoots a real stunk water at you. And it's the first time in human history that a nonviolent protest demanded to be afflicted by the security. Can you imagine Martin Luther King demanding to be water hosed or attacked by German shepherds? This is unbelievable. So the skunk did not come, and everyone was getting ready to go home. Nothing happened. And then my photographer showed up, Boaz. He's got the outfit, he's got the long lens, he's got the motor drive, he's got the cameras, and suddenly the riot begins. No cameras, no riot. And this is interesting. Nabi Saleh is 550 people from one extended family in a tiny town, a village. They all speak Arabic. And the soldiers are all speaking Hebrew. But the riot is conducted in English. Now, why is that? And where are these cameras? B'Tselem cameras. And not only that, a woman who was organizing at the top of the organization of this riot is being paid $85 an incident if it is violent. If there's no violence, she gets nothing. If there is violence and she gets to write the report, then she gets $85. That's about 2 to 4 times the average Palestinian daily wage. If you can find work, she's paid by the WCLAC. another international NGO, which is, by the way, is doing some very good work in other places, but here they're paying her, and she doesn't get a nickel unless there's violence, and the WCLAC is being supported by robust donations from George Soros' Open Societies Foundation. And there's more. I have limited time, but I wish to talk, but I've been asked everywhere about the BDS. This BDS issue is now very strong. And I've been asked, where does the BDS get its oxygen? And the answer is money. You cannot have a BDS movement without money. Now, when did the BDS start? Everywhere I went in these parliaments, they came up with 2001, 1999, 2005. It started in Berlin in 1933, April 1st. It spread to Palestine almost immediately through the robust involvement of the Mufti of Jerusalem. It was adopted by the entire Arab and Islamic community from India to London to Yugoslavia to Damascus. It was the forerunner to a robust alliance between the Palestinian Arabs and the wider international Arab and Muslim community with the Nazis, led by the Mufti of Jerusalem, which directly resulted in the Mufti's involvement in the Farhud in Iraq on June 1st and June 2nd, 1941 attempt to exterminate all the Jews in Iraq, and then to the deployment of 3 divisions of Arabs, Palestinians, and Muslims in Central Europe. 3 divisions, not 10 guys, not 10,000 guys, tens of thousands of guys. The Hanshar Division, the Skanderbeg, the Kama. And where is the, and now it extends to BDS movement today. That is its ancestry. Where is this money coming from? The New Israel Fund, which is involved in many, many good things in this country. I've studied them. There is more information about the good deeds of the New Israel Fund in this book than in any other journalistic enterprise. Because I did not limit myself to a 7,000-word piece, I put a 77,000-word news book out to give them the full ability to get all of their point of view in. They fund approximately 800 organizations. Many of them are doing very, very important work, as this gentleman said. They're helping battered women, they're helping inequality. It's called a kumat. But approximately 80 of them are engaged in a systematic political campaign in Israel, which they're entitled to do because that's what Israel's about, a competition of ideas from the rational to the absurd and even beyond. But in this case, it's all financed by the American taxpayer and by taxpayers in the EU and elsewhere. For every $1 million in NIF, George Soros and Ford Foundation funding, taxpayers in America have to subsidize $440,000. For a period of time, a lot of people reported on their financial papers here that they were being funded by the Ford Israel Fund. Ford Israel Fund. It's in their financial papers. It's demonstrated in their reports. I investigated the Ford Israel Fund. There is no Ford Israel Fund. No phone number, no address, no bank account, no grants. Does not exist. It's operated out of a house in New Jersey. It's the New Israel Fund, not the Ford Israel Fund. Now, where does the BDS come in? In order for the BDS to come in order for the BDS to be effective, it needs 2 bottles of oxygen. One, it needs a distortion of the true narrative of international law, and how it applies to this area. I'm not going to get into it. It's a long story. Starts in 1920. But let's not get into it now. And they need a constant 24/7 conveyor belt of atrocity stories against the IDF, against the Israeli government, against Israeli policies. And who is providing this information? I have some information here about that. I have just a few names. There's a group called Adala, which has worked very hard. I'm reading from a financial document that I've obtained. Adala has worked very hard to get Israeli soldiers prosecuted. They bragged that they were behind the Goldstone report. They and others would like to see this to be a non-Jewish state. They received in 2012 $209,161. There's the number. I have another group called the Association for Civil Rights in Israel, $900,000 in 2012. I'm mentioning these groups not because they aren't involved in important things, but because they're advocates and proponents of either the BDS or activities which feed in to the mentality for the BDS. I see another group here, BINCOM, $194,000, $800. B'Tselem, and I know B'Tselem does good work, but they don't have to do it 5 inches from your face. It could be done 5 yards from your face, 500 yards from your face. B'Tselem got $255,000. HaMoked got $88,000. And the total given to all groups, here's Physicians for Human Rights, $216,000. Rabbis for Human Rights, $104,000. Syncopa Community, $25,000. And all of this comes from the New Israel Fund gifts of 2012. And that totaled $23.1 million to all the groups. Much of it money spent on very good programs that are doing things terribly right. And some of it is going to programs where things are being terribly wrong. Now, how does this more intimately associate the New Israel Fund with the BDS? The New Israel Fund spent hundreds of thousands of dollars creating, supporting, advancing, and erecting the international infrastructure for the BDS Coalition of Women for Peace, the Who Prophets Database, and many other groups. And then they stopped funding them in 2011. The rifle was built, the platoon was made, and now all of these bullets come through by this daily activity. One can only wonder what would have happened if the New Israel Fund had not given hundreds of thousands of taxpayer-endowed monies to the Coalition for Women in Peace and to these other groups that help provide the implication that Israeli soldiers are engaged in war crimes on a regular basis. So, I happen to know that there are many, 10 minutes, that's more than I thought. Okay, 7, okay. And everywhere I went, I'm talking about all the things in my book, everybody asked me about SodaStream. Apparently, I was the only guy who flew to Europe on Super Bowl day, so I missed the commercial. And people said, this is anti-Semitism. And people said, well, that's a cheap shot. It's not anti-Semitism. Really? It's not anti-Semitism? Everywhere I went, in all the parliaments, in all the communities, with all the lobbyists, I said the same thing. If this factory and the other factories that I visited